Yes, the happiest day of this man's life. The first day he can see, he can open his eyes and see. And imagine that they brought this man to the Pharisees. And the book of John in verse 49 lets you know that it was the Sabbath day that Jesus did that. So as long as they insert that verse, you know that trouble is coming. So this man, the happiest day of his life, but they bring him to the Pharisees. And so the Pharisees asked him, the Pharisees also asking him again how he received his sight, and he said to them, he applied mud to my eyes, I washed, and now I see. Now, the way it's written here, you will not know that, but in the Greek, it's more of an interrogation. So it's not just one time asking. They just keep asking this man over and over. Another asking for them to believe, but they're asking of doubting. They were asking this man so that he would change his story. So they kept asking him over and over, who did this? How did it happen? They kept asking him over and over just to make this man change his story. But they were not believing what the man was saying. So, therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others were saying, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And they had a big quarrel among them. So some of the Pharisees were saying, well, that man cannot be from God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. Some were saying, well, he must be from God because a sinner cannot perform such signs. And so they had a big quarrel among them. And so they had to ask the man who had been healed. They asked him, what do you say about him? Since he opened your eyes, what do you say about the man? And so this man now takes a stand for Christ, and this man says, well, he must be a man of God. And so this man, although he did not fully know Christ yet, but he knew that a man of God is the man who healed him. And so this man is already starting to witness for Christ. And so the Jews, they didn't even believe the man so much that they had to go and ask his parents. So they go to his parents and they ask his parents, is this your son? And was he really born blind? And all that. And so the parents had to say, well, yes, this is our son. We know that he was born blind, but we don't know how he now sees. We know he now sees, but we don't know who did it. And verse 22, John inserts this verse to let us know that they were lying. You think I'm tea? Because he says his parents only said this because they were afraid of the Jews. Because the Jews had already said if anybody confessed Jesus to be Christ, they would be kicked out of the synagogue. And what it means to be kicked out of the synagogue means that when you're kicked out, that means it affects your social life and your financial life. So it means that if you're an outcast, nobody's not talking to you, and that means if nobody's not talking to you, nobody's giving you a job. So they did not want that to happen to them. So they said, we don't know how that happened, so they told him, ask him for himself, he can speak for himself, he is of age. So brethren, one thing I want you to recognize from that is that when you stand for Christ, even your own family or friends might disown you. When you stand for Christ, sometimes you may just get kicked out of your home. That may not have happened to us, but we know about stories like that. We know about people who came to Christ and then they end up being kicked out. I remember watching a movie called God's Not Dead, and this girl was a Muslim, and then after they found out she was a Christian, her father kicked her out and she had to be on the streets. And so these things happen. And the Bible even says that will happen in Matthew chapter 10. It says, Jesus says, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Your enemies will be in your own household. So God himself says that sometimes when you accept Christ and when you believe in the gospel, that these things might bring contention in the home. And so, brethren, it may not be in your home, but in your circles, wherever you are, people may say they don't deal with you anymore because we got about Jay-Z talk. So they might disown you, they might discard you. Verse 24 says, so for a second time, they summoned the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God, we know that this man is a sinner. In other words, they tell this man, like I said last month, we know that Jesus is a sinner. Imagine the Pharisees calling Jesus a sinner. But the man replied, a very bold response. The man replied, he said, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know is though I was blind, now I see. And John Newton um, he was a slave trader. This man, after he transport slaves from Africa to the Caribbean to the Americas, this man, after he did that for so long and realized the horror that he put so many people through, the black people through, this man, one day after giving his life to Christ and realizing his sin and his distress, he said, he then wrote down a song, one of the most popular songs in our hymn book. He wrote that song. He said, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see." And that is where he got that line from as he wrote that song. When he saw how wretched he was and what he was doing to people, and he read that verse, he was blind, but now he see. And so, brethren, just like the man responded, "I once was blind, but now I see." It's just a simple statement, but it is so important. Before we know theology of this and doctrine of that, we should at least know the difference between when we were blind and now that we see. And so he said to them, and so they said to him, "What did he do to open your eyes?" And so these men, they kept interrogating this man over and over. The same question over and over. And so this man now gets bold, and this man now says to them, "I already told you and you do not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want to become his disciples, do you?" So this man now gets so bold, he now tells them, it seems like you want to become his disciple. And so he said that sarcastically because in the Greek it shows that he expected them to give a negative answer. And so this man is now so bold, he's now been a witness for Christ, and now he's now telling these men, it seems like you want to be a disciple of Christ. And he expected a negative answer. And so they said in verse 28, they spoke abusively to him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he's from." So this man, they now get vexed. You've been, and what me say, I get him say, "We are not this man's disciples, we are disciples of Moses." There's this joke about Billy Graham. Billy Graham was once coming from a crusade, and then he saw this man, a man now was dead drunk. And this man looked at Billy Graham and he told Billy Graham, I'm one of your disciples, Billy Graham. And Billy Graham looked at this man and said, "Well, you must be one of my disciples because you're not a disciple of Christ in the state that you are." And so what he meant by that is that as long as you're a disciple of another man, you're not there yet. But if you're a disciple of Christ, that is when you're a true disciple. So this man was saying the disciples of Moses, but Moses himself was speaking of Christ, because Christ in the New Testament says, "Search the Old Testament and see that it speaks of me." So Moses himself was a disciple of Christ, but yet these men were saying that they are only disciples of Moses and they were not disciples of Christ. And so these men rejected Christ and also put the man out. So the man responded, he said, "Well, here is an amazing thing that you do not know where he's from, and yet he opened my eyes. And we know that God does not listen to sinners. But if someone is a God-fearing and does his will, he listens to him. Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man was not from God, he could do nothing." So this man now is even preaching to these men, and he has become so bold. And sometimes, brethren, I don't know if that ever happened to you, that when you're speaking to unbelievers, words just come to your mind that you probably never even think of. And so, through the power of the Holy Spirit, these things happen. And so this man becomes so bold, he now gives these men a whole lecture about that God does not listen to sinners, but only people who obey him, he listens to them. And never has it been done before. Anybody born blind has ever been healed before. And so you can search the whole Old Testament that you will never see that happened before. And so that was the very first time that it happened. So this man gave a breakdown that God does not listen to sinners, God only listens to people who obey him. And the only time he listens to sinners is when they do the sinner's prayer. And so these men get the Pharisees, they got mad and they kicked this man out of the synagogue. And so, brethren, as I said, standing for Christ might get you kicked out of certain places. Standing for Christ will get you pushed out of different places. Sometimes you might be going out to minister and people will close their doors on you right away because the gospel is an offense to men. And so, verse 35, Jesus ends, the passage ends with a blessing and a curse. Verse 35 says, this is the blessing. Jesus said that they put him out, and upon finding him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And so brethren realized that when the world rejected this man, Christ accepted him. When the world rejects you, Christ is always there, open arms to embrace you. So this man is now kicked out. And so brethren, sometimes when you are kicked out, you may lose a lot of things, worldly things. But when you come to Christ, whatever you lose for his sake, you will gain it so much more in his name. Whatever you lose for the sake of Christ, your reward will be even much, much greater, whatever you lose. And so many of us, we probably give up a lot when we came to Christ. But the blessings, the rewards we get will be so much greater than what we expect. And so this man is now, he answered and said, who is he that I may believe in him? And Jesus said to him, you are both seeing him and he's the one who's talking to you. And he said, I believe, Lord, and I worshipped him. If it's one way you can know if somebody is truly repentant, somebody is truly a believer, you will see a life of worship and reverence for God. So as you see, this man is now, he now got spiritual sight, he now got physical sight. And so, brethren, when we go out to minister to people, let us bring that gospel, the gospel that brings spiritual sight to blind men. Everyone in the world is blinded by Satan. But when we bring the gospel, that is what opens the eyes of men. That is what opens men's eyes. And so now, after men's eyes are open, we can now tell that they are truly saved when we see a life of worship and reverence for God. And now let's look at the curse. Verse 39 says, and Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Jesus said, I came to make the blind see, and those who think they can see, I came to make them blind. So for those who already believe that they have their own salvation, their own self-righteousness, I don't come for these people, not for the religious. I came for those who are blind, and I came to make them see. And he says, those who were with him from the Pharisees heard these things, and they said, we are not blind too, are we? And Jesus said to them, if you are blind, you would have no sin. But now that you may sin, we see your sin remains. Jesus told this man that if you had admit that you were blind, you would get sight. But if you may sin that you already see, then I can do nothing for you. I was watching a show on a medical show, and then there was this woman in the hospital, and the doctors were telling her that they seen signs that she has AIDS and HIV. So they told this woman, let us do the blood test to make sure what we're seeing. But this woman was adamant that she kept telling them that she don't have AIDS, she cannot ever believe that. So she was adamant that she do want these things. But the doctors told her that unless they can really check it to make sure, then they can start giving her medication. And so in the same way with these men here, if they would admit that they are blind, God will give them sight. But if you say in your adamant that you say, oh, I'm already good, I have my own self-righteousness, then you will never get that healing. You will never receive that sight. And so, brethren, the Bible says, he who believes in the Son is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already. And so there is sight to be given. And I'm not talking about physical sight, spiritual sight. There is sight to be given to the world. But they first have to admit that they need the sight. Yeah, as long as somebody tells you, well, I'm good already, I'm doing good works, I'll make it on my own, then that person will not receive sight. But somebody who sees that they are in sin and they can do nothing for themselves, these are the people who will receive sight. Alright, let me just close with a story about a woman called Fanny Crosby. Can you hear me? Alright. Fanny Crosby. She was a woman who was, when she was born, it was only 6 weeks after she was born, and she had an eye infection. So this woman, she was taken to the doctor. And the doctor she usually goes to, he was not there. So they brought her to another doctor. And that doctor, he was not a real doctor. So what happened is that this woman, Fanny Crosby, when she was 6 months old, they did a surgery on her eye, and now she lost her eyesight completely. So after she lost her eyesight, she grew up being a very bright girl. She was a very smart girl, and she was so smart that she began to write poems, and began to write these nice poems. These poems made her end up in front of the President of the United States to recite his poems. But when she was about 14 years old, she gave her life to Christ, and this woman started writing poems and songs for Christ. And so she was so good at writing songs for God that she wrote about over 1,000 songs. And when I say songs, I'm talking about hymns. And so some of the hymns that she wrote, as I tell you, you will understand that this woman received spiritual sight. Let me tell you some of the hymns that we sing today that she wrote. She wrote, Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. She wrote, Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord. She wrote, Near the cross. She wrote, Pass me not, O gentle Savior. She wrote, Redeemed, how I love to proclaim him. She wrote, Rescue the perishing, care for the dying. She wrote, To God be the glory, great things he has done. And many, many more. So this woman, whenever you sing your hymns, you'll see a name written as the composer of these songs in your hymn book. These are some of the songs that she wrote. And although this woman was practically blind from birth, she has helped us and many others see the glory of Christ so much more. And so that's why I want to say that spiritual sight is so much more greater, so much better than having physical sight. Because you can lose your sight in this life, but you have spiritual sight, and that is where it all matters. So brethren, let us continue to spread the gospel, share the gospel with others, and allow men to see the glory of God and the glory of Christ in our lives and in our ministry. God is the one who gives sight, and God is the one who allows people to remain in blindness. For those who want sight, there is sight available. For those who reject it, they will remain blind. So let us go out and allow people to see the beauty of the cross of Christ. Thank you very much. Have a good day.